Well, good afternoon and welcome to Making the Case for Transit from an Economic Development Lens, a very timely topic, if I may say so myself. I am Debbie Frank. I'm the moderator for this session, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here and joined by an awesome panel that I will introduce in a moment. We have a great discussion in store. In today's climate, when we showcase the benefits of public transit or transit-oriented development, are we clear enough about the economic benefits, from new or increased property tax revenue to job creation? This session will look at the ways that various land uses along transit contribute to the tax base and how the tax base in turn supports services and infrastructure investments. We will also look at transit-driven strategies to address job access, crime, traffic congestion, and environmental impacts. And finally, we will look at the ways that underdevelopment and disinvestment in transit cuts connectivity, depriving a region of jobs, and depriving residents of access to opportunities. So in a nutshell, we will revisit the case for transit and show how it can do more for a city or a region than just move people. So before I introduce the panel, let me tell you a little bit about me. I am the Director of Transit-Oriented Development at MARTA. I manage the day-to-day activities as it relates to planning, design, implementation, and asset management for our joint development projects. I've been with the authority a little under 8 years, and prior to joining MARTA, I was involved in real estate development, community and economic development, and city planning in Nashville, Tennessee. So now let me introduce the panel in the order of their presentations. First, we have Frank White III. Frank is the president and CEO of Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, KCATA. Before assuming this role, he was vice president of development, with Ride KC Development Corporation, a division of KCATA. Frank took the helm of the authority in August of last year. He is the first African American to hold this seat. Within his first year, Frank is being credited with improving the internal systems, resulting in easing the staffing shortage, significantly improved customer satisfaction results, and building valuable relationships with funding partners locally, regionally, and nationally. He uses his love for speaking to discuss leadership in general and the future of transportation. Next, we have Michael Krantz. Michael is the Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Development at Metro Transit in the Twin Cities. He's a planner and engineer and has been working for the transit agency for the past decade. Michael leads the Office of Metro Transit, the Office of TOD for Metro Transit, and his projects have included a residential pass program, building a region-wide public parcel database, and advancing joint development projects on agency-owned land. Last but not least is Alison Nemirow. Alison is a principal in AECOM Sustainable Economic Practice. She has nearly 15 years of experience as an urban economist with a particular focus on the role of transit and other infrastructure in creating sustainable communities. Alison has extensive experience advising agencies on economic impacts of transit improvements and the role of value capturing in financing transit and TOD investments. She works across the building, transportation, and land use sectors to develop implementation-focused plans and strategies. Alison has advised transit agencies across the country, including Connecticut Department of Transportation, Santa Clara Valley Transit Authority, Bay Area Rapid Transit, Caltran, as well as regional planning agencies in Boston, Western Connecticut, Baltimore, San Francisco, and Southern California. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So before I ask Frank to come to the podium, I do want to share some information on two projects at MARTA that I think will set the stage of a much larger discussion by our panelists. The first is the Summerhill Bus Rapid Transit, now known as MARTA Rapid Summerhill, which is MARTA's first BRT route in Atlanta. All the buzz right now around this bus rapid transit route is the economic impact this transit investment will have and is having, for that matter, for the city of Atlanta, Georgia State University, business owners and residents, and the neighborhoods along the corridor. It is a 4.8-mile route from the Atlanta Beltline to South Downtown, and it serves the government facilities along the route, employment and educational centers, goods and services, and several neighborhoods. The system offers bus rapid transit service every 10 minutes between 14 stations. The budget itself was $95 million. We broke ground just this past summer, and operations is planned for June of 2025. There has been roughly $850 million deployed in the Summerhill community or immediately adjacent to the Summerhill community. And I want to just highlight one of the early investments at the southern terminus of the route. It is a $250 million affordable housing investment by Exact Capital in New York. And it is the first transaction for the MARTA Goldman Sachs TOD Affordable Housing Initiative. Next is the Edgewood Candler Park TOD, and it is situated on 6.3 acres of MARTA-owned property at a heavy rail station. This project is at 100% built out, resulting in 332 residential units. 75 of those units are affordable, 8,000 square feet of office retail space, a 21,000 square feet cultural facility, and the private sector investment was about $95 million. What I really want to highlight is that within a half-mile radius of the station, since 2019, we have seen 1,200 residential units and 45,000 square feet of commercial space, and this is all private sector investments. And the last point that I would want to make here is that the property tax revenue that has been generated solely on the MARTA-owned property has been $1.67 million, and that's been between the period of 2018 and 2022. So I hope that I have given you a little insight as to the larger discussion that we're going to have this afternoon, and we have reserved space for Q&A with the audience, so we're looking for you to step up to that mic and shoot some questions at us for sure. And with that, I will invite Mr. Frank White to the stage, or the podium. You're on the stage.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Is everybody up? I saw coffee outside, so I'll try to be interesting this afternoon. No, she was at my panel this morning. It's a funny conversation. I tend to, when I get done talking, you're usually not confused where I'm coming from. So there is no gray. So again, I'm Frank White III. I'm the CEO of the KCATA. Before I get started, my belief is that the KCATA is an economic development agency that just happens to run transit. I came to the organization 7 years ago. I actually came as a chief marketing officer from a previous career owning an insurance agency. So I did not come from transit, did not use transit. I knew what it was, but I didn't really care. It was just something that I saw. Our CEO brought me in because he wanted a different approach, a different set of eyes on transit. What does it look like? And so I went to the marketing side, where within 2 years we won 3 AdWheel Awards and had a great team, because I believe then, I still do believe, that transit will be saved by non-transit people because we're not bound by the rules of transit. So when I came in, I didn't understand what you could and couldn't do in transit. So that was my approach to it. So after 2 years in marketing, our CEO said, hey, I want to do, TOD, a TOD agency within the KCATA. And I'm like, what is TOD? I have no economic development background, did not know what land value was, value capture. I didn't know what those terms meant. And so myself and a guy named Brian Starner were tasked to create an agency. And it was supposed to be done in-house. But then, because of internal politics being what they were, we were told to take it outside the ATA, which was the Ride KC Development Corporation, where we had a separate board of directors, separate policies, separate office space, And we were kind of the weird guys in the basement because we were trying to do things that hadn't been done before, at least in Kansas City, I would say. So when I go through some of this stuff, that's want to kind of give you a framework of where I'm coming from. Okay. So the whole idea was, you know, we have this bi-state compact. We're a bi-state authority, 7 counties, 2 states, interstate commerce clause, cross jurisdictions, have all these cool tools we can use, but we were kind of a bus company, and we weren't really trying to say, okay, how do we expand? So with the state of this corporation, we put this here. How do we kind of put that connection together? How do you sit here and do a bus rapid transit line for $62 million and not be concerned where you get off the bus? Where do you live? Where do you play? Where do you eat? Where do you worship? How do you improve a community beyond just the bus? And so that was kind of the driving thing behind us, is how do we get that interest? How do we get private capital to go where it normally wouldn't go? How do we get it to, you know, feel, be a catalyst, so to speak, to make them feel comfortable, safe, and being with a federal agency, it just kind of stabilized some things. And we had plenty of incentives from the city, from the state, but what we didn't have was private capital. And the tools that we had to use allowed us to do so. So we focused on 3 things: workforce development, job access, and then transit, kind of a 3-legged stool. Is how do we take this message that public transit really is an economic driver, a workforce development driver, and get people to buy into that. And really it was about being where we hadn't been. So my job was to go and sit down with the private sector, the civic sector, and kind of tell our story, because our story had been being told for us, and how we connect people to opportunities through transit. You know, we have over 16 million rides a year. We cover a whole region. We kind of have a bigger, broader view where we're supposed to go. But no one ever been at that table to talk about why transit matters, why development matters, why getting people to work matters. And it became discussions from pro formas to return on investment to, if these people don't show up to work, what does it cost you, as opposed to just doing it because it makes sense. The idea was to get them to work with civic, business, and us to create a new model of how we get things done. So everything that we do at the ATA is based on access to what we call the 4 pillars: education, employment, housing, and healthcare. That's the fulcrum by which we do all of our decision-making at the ATA, and we think that TOD perfectly marries those 4 goals. So the idea was, how do you create a sustainable cycle to where transit facilitates development, but also development makes better transportation? So 50 years ago, transit was just a transaction. I pay a fare, I go somewhere. We view transportation as being transformative, not just to an individual, but to a community, through we call it TOD, or now we call it TOC, is the more current framework. So it's a methodology that just basically says transit is the foundation of all the things we do in real estate: design, planning, development. Start off with rail, but now it's moved to different modes: bus, rail, bike, other mobility. But the point is, it's the center point of everything that we do and how we make our decisions. It gives you choices, value capture, strength of your networks. It's connect, it's compact, it's diverse, it creates vitality, it creates safety, and when done right, it can reduce the cost of living, because in Kansas City, 42% of incomes are in housing and transit. So we think, use this way, we can reduce those costs, but also it doesn't benefit the riders. People that just live there as well benefit from this kind of development, and it can improve health, access to work. And really what it does is create, for us as an agency, it shows value to how we do things, how we get things done. And we're not necessarily like, why are they coming here again? It's like, we want the ATA. My goal was to be, nothing would be done business-wise, development-wise in Kansas City without saying there's the ATA at the table. Because you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And right now, transit's on the menu generally, collectively across this country. And we all have to really press hard in our industry to get at the table and show our value. So a quick history of the ATA. We were created by Congress in 1966. It's a bi-state compact that came from the Mass Transportation Act of 1964. It's a bi-state compact, one I think of 3 in the country. I think it's us, bi-state in St. Louis, and I think MARTA, that region in DC. But what it does is it gives us the power to basically do anything transit-wise in Kansas City, but also offers us some economic development tools, such as conduit bond financing, sales tax exemptions on new construction materials, condemnation powers, and land use management. So these are things we've had for years, but never used until 4 years ago. And so it's given us a broad range of authority with 7 counties, 2 states, 126 cities, to really have an impact on the region that we serve as the federal designated pass-through from the FTA as well. we have a lot of weight and power. It's based on the compact of the Port Authority of New York City. We just never activated it for whatever reason. Well, 4 years ago, we chose to do so. But like most cities, in 1950, KC-Mo was 81 square miles. Now it's 320. And that's just Kansas City, Missouri. And we built cities we can't afford anymore. We got infrastructure we can't sustain, we can't mobilize. And so how do you rebuild that? We felt with our compact powers in the corporation, we could step in and have a role to play in that. Because you see our service map, it's very broad, covers a lot of areas, and if we can say, let's develop on those corridors, we can do some things. There we go. All right. So basically, it's this simple. We help to fund and invest in projects on routes that we serve that connects people to opportunities, but also a lot of work on job access, workforce development, and public policy to advocate for our rideshare communities. And we've got a bond program called START, it's Sustaining Transportation and Reinvesting Together, which allows us to be a conduit pass-through for private developers, and if they hit a certain amount of, we call TOD marks and steps, reduces their fee cost and gets their term for a longer period of time. Plus, we can collect a fee on it as well. But we're very clear that we're not we're not incentive shop, we're just really for transportation and where it goes into we call distressed areas where people need that capital. We can bring this capital through these programs, and I'll show at the end the list of stuff we worked on. So it's all based on data. We use a company called Replica for this, and this is some of the decisions that we make, looking at, okay, is this the best use of land use policy? Is this the best use of urban design? We also have another heat map that's color-coded that says, infrastructure-wise, is it more prepared for transit or development? Is it not prepared? This came from our city audit that we did 2 years ago with multi-studios. We identified over 4,000 properties on Truce going eastward. Truce kind of our dividing line in Kansas City between, black and white to 435 highway, a half mile to a mile off our current bus lines that we identified over 10 years were intentional of how we developed single-family apartments, duplexes, sixplexes, different things off these corridors. We know in 10 years we can bring 100,000 more residents to Kansas City, Missouri, but also generate about $40 million in property tax revenue. But the key is to be intentional. And that was the purpose of the corporation, is to take this information to developers, to cities, to civic leaders, and explain there is a method and a methodology, and this is kind of the map that we're going from. So the idea is we strategically invest, we can improve the quality of life, and also, what's important to me, is provide equity to the people that we serve. I'll say something else, but I forgot. Oh well. So these are just some of the projects that we've done in the last year. On the bond side, North Point was the first one. That was the one I did before I switched roles in Jamestown. But these were two market rate. But we've also got the Vincino Nash projects in Paseo East, are affordable housing projects through VITEC. So it's about $250 million worth of projects, 800 to 1,000 new units, and they're all on transit corridors. All these developers have invested in new bus stops, keeping shelters clean, infrastructure sidewalks, hiking trails, all the things that we would do, that we would have to do through the community benefits agreement they're going to do for us. There's Michael Riley there. He replaced me. He just did another project I didn't have in time for this presentation. It's $85 million development, 250 new units, Michael? Okay. And so on a piece of property that was worth about $13,000 before, now it's worth about $400,000 just from us getting involved in it. So we're trying to bring value back to these areas that we serve in a way that it really hasn't been done before. When I became the CEO, I did bring the corporation back in-house because the dynamics that kept us separate were no longer there because I was in charge. And I felt like I could give it more resource, more support, being in-house with the ATA brand behind it, because we've got a lot of cool things. Michael is starting to work with HUD now, EPA. He's doing a lot of work with the land bank in Kansas City with 3,000 or so properties. We're moving more in the direction of joint ventures, owning land, owning property. That's where we're going. So between the brownfield development properties and as well as the land bank properties, Michael's taken what we did into another level. And so, I just want to shout out to Mike for doing a great job because I'm a hard act to follow. And but I'm a huge believer in TOC. We're now working with our planning department as we get these raised grants to make sure as we do these studies, we're integrating all these pieces in. I think we while not have the final answer for the housing problem, I think we can play a major part with our resources and what we do. I'm excited about the HUD stuff. We'll meet with them this week to see what kind of resources are available to us. But I've kind of staked my CEO tenure on TOD and TOC. I think that's the future for us. And another thing this is really interesting, I thought, was just these projects here over the next 20 years will generate for the ATA $26 million in operating revenue that we would desperately need over the next time. So this is also a way for us to get operational dollars. We talk about the fiscal cliff coming. We talk about creating density in our cities because we get paid by sales taxes. So we're trying to find different ways to be a little bit more proactive in how we get our revenue aside from certain sales taxes. And this has the potential for a long life cycle. I know when I left, we were just kind of ramping up. And I know Mike stays pretty busy on his side. All kind of people reaching out to us now. So before, I was kind of doing the old, cold calling, get on the phone, go into stuff. But now people are coming to us, wanting to know how they can work with us on the development side. So it's been a pretty exciting thing for me to see it happen from 4 years ago, not knowing anything about TOD, to seeing where we are today. Hell, they've been standing here right now. So this is exciting work. I was very honored when Ms. Frank asked me to come speak today, because I think it was a pretty good story to tell. And that's all I've got. Are we taking questions now? I went away. We can finish, go through. That's cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As Debbie mentioned, I'm Michael Krantz, and I'm the Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Development at Metro Transit. We have been expanding our transit system fairly quickly over the past couple decades. Back in 2004, we opened our first light rail line, which was the Metro Blue Line, and today we're operating 2 light rail lines, highway BRT, and 3 arterial BRT corridors. We're also in various stages of planning, design, and construction for 2 additional LRT lines, 2 BRT lines, and 4 new arterial BRT lines. And we're often asked in the TOD office, well, what does that mean for economic development? Are we seeing new housing and job growth along these corridors? I've worked in various TOD capacities for Metro Transit over the past decade, and when I first started, we were really tracking that economic development on a very ad hoc basis, and it was typically in response to media requests. So we'd had a spreadsheet of these developments. We were tracking very basic details about those projects, and then we'd get a request for that, we'd summarize it and send it out. It wasn't a terribly robust process, and it was becoming an increasingly unsustainable process for us as we were starting to work on multiple projects simultaneously. So we worked with our research group to develop a standardized report that we could update annually and relatively quickly that would allow us to answer the following question. So how much development was happening in the region? How much of that regional development is happening near our high-frequency transit ways? How much development is happening along each of the individual transit ways? What type of development is occurring? And then what are the trends over time? So we developed the Development Trends Along Transit report. If you're interested in the full report, we post it on our website every year, the latest version, which is at metrotransit.org/TOD. And it answers all of those questions, and it provides a lot of good detail on that development activity. This is actually a map from the forthcoming report. Amy Yoder in the audience is leading that effort, and we'll be publishing the updated version soon. But what you're seeing here is development activity, permitted development activity from 2022, just from 2022. The yellow are your multifamily residential, red's commercial development, blue is public and institutional, and purple is industrial. And I think the headline from this effort, which has been the headline for a few years, is that our transitways are capturing a disproportionate share of development in the region. So over 30% of all regional development has happened near high-frequency transit since 2009. That share goes up to 40% when we just look at multifamily and commercial development. So this is looking at all multifamily development since 2018. We just show the past 5 years since it just starts stacking on top of itself. We've seen over 50,000 new housing units being built along high-frequency transit over that stretch, which is really incredible. And as the panelists were talking about this morning, at the plenary, that has really tangible benefits for the people living and working along transit. It means more households have access to high-frequency transit, to affordable transportation, and it means that all of those households have better access to jobs, goods, and services. It's also vital for advancing goals related to climate, health, and safety. So one of the questions, we did a sample analysis of the tax base along transit, and after several requests, we decided we were going to expand that to cover our entire transitway system. And that's really where I'm going to focus this presentation, this is a fairly new analysis for us. And what you're seeing here is tax per acre for parcels in the entire 7-county region. Dark green areas are generating up to $15,000 per acre. And dark purple parcels are generating over $1 million per acre in property tax revenue. I think what's really interesting about this type of map is how easily you can identify activity centers. We often talk about activity centers in urban planning, and it's really easy to identify where those are on this kind of analysis. So folks familiar with the Twin Cities can pick out downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, maybe the Mall of America, as well as town centers throughout the region. But what we were really interested in is how our transit ways are performing relative to the region as a whole. So we coded all of these parcels over time based on their proximity to transit. So this is just the high-frequency transitway map from 2022. And you can see downtown, again, the downtown Minneapolis area and downtown St. Paul. And unsurprisingly, these are the areas that generate the most property tax revenue for the region. They serve the most jobs in housing. They tend to generate the highest transit ridership, and they also tend to be the most bikeable and walkable parts of the region. Significantly, that area accounts for just 2% of the region's taxable parcels, but it's generating over 25% of the region's property tax revenue. Like so many regions across the country, ours has changed quite a bit over the past couple decades. So this is showing that property tax map back in 2006. I'm showing that entire high-frequency transit way buffer area, but at the time, again, we were just operating one of our light rail lines, operating from downtown Minneapolis to the Mall of America and the airport, which are in the bottom center of this map. This is that same map. Let's see if it goes to the next slide. This is that same map, again, from 2022. So just 2006, 2022, after a lot of that transitway expansion had occurred. Now, most of the parcels in these areas have not seen redevelopment. And I think it's worth noting that there has been a gradual increase in tax revenue from those parcels. But I think what's really significant is how much investment really has occurred near transit and how economically productive that development has been for the communities where that's occurring. Most of those new purple columns that you're seeing are new investments near our transit ways. A question that we often receive is really how important is proximity to transit? And we're not, I'll be honest, we're not doing the kind of statistical analysis which would allow us to say that transit is driving this investment. But one thing that we did do is just look at how taxes or parcels were performing based on their distance from transit. So the yellow line here is showing property tax per acre over time for parcels that are 1 to 3 miles away from the nearest transit way. The gray line there is showing parcels that are 1/2 to 1 mile. The orange line is showing parcels that are 1/4 to 1/2 mile. And then the blue line is showing parcels that are within 1/4 mile of transit. I think what's really clear from this chart is that parcels within 1/4 mile of transit are growing much faster from a property tax revenue perspective than those further away. And I think it's worth emphasizing that a lot of that growth is driven by the new investments in these transit corridors. A project I'd like to feature is the Metro Green Line, partially because of this began project development back in 2006, which was when we have data to do the kind of analysis that I've been sharing. It actually began operating back in 2014, so the lifespan, it's had quite a lifespan at this point. This is the property tax per revenue for the Metro Green Line back in 2006. And you can see downtown Minneapolis on the left, downtown St. Paul on the right, and what was at the time a relatively low-density commercial corridor connecting the two. There's clearly a lot of development intensity in both of the downtowns with the central business districts, but not a lot in between. This is the same map from 2022. Through the Development Trends Along Transit report, we've tracked over $7.8 billion in development along this corridor. And as a result of that, this corridor is now generating nearly $250 million in additional property tax revenue annually. And that continues to go up as more development is happening along this corridor. So just to show how that compares to the region as a whole in our high-frequency transit system, the blue line shows the average property tax per acre for the average parcel in the region. It looks relatively flat, but it has grown gradually over time. So the average parcel in the region is generating around $3,700 per acre, and it's grown to around $5,700 per acre in 2022. When you look at high-frequency transit, back in 2006, that average parcel within a half mile of transit was generating about 7 times that amount, and it's doubled over that same period. So this is, here we've layered in the Metro Green Line, and I'm regretting that I showed the green line as a gray line on this map, but back in 2006, the average parcel near the Metro Green Line was generating around $80,000 per acre. And that was partially because it was serving both of the downtown areas, but since then it's more than doubled over that same stretch. So today, the average parcel along the Metro Green Line is generating around $180,000 per acre. And again, that's compared to the average regional parcel, which is at $5,700. I want to bring this back to the project level, just to show how impactful these projects can be. And there are many, many of these projects along our transit ways. In many cases, these developments are happening on parcels that were previously vacant or underutilized, and this may be a surface parking lot. In this case, this development was actually previously a gas station, which is why I chose this site. The combined estimated market value of that site back in 2006 was around $300,000, and it was generating around $35,000 per acre. And you can see it in the chart in the bottom right, how that compares to the region and high-frequency transit as a whole. After it was redeveloped in 2022, the combined market value was $9.5 million, and it was generating over $500,000 per acre in property tax revenue, so a 14-fold increase. And that's a story that's been repeated dozens and dozens of times along our transit ways. I want to, in closing, I want to bring this back to the communities where this is happening. I'm going to focus just on Minneapolis. Partially because a lot of development has happened in Minneapolis. They also provided some data that allowed us to do this kind of analysis. And what you're seeing here is the growth in tax base from the 4 largest property tax classes in Minneapolis. So blue is residential non-homestead, red is commercial development, green is residential homestead, and purple is apartment. So just looking at those first 3, there has been a fairly steady increase in tax base from those property tax classes over the past decade, all increasing about 75%. Commercial was doing quite well, and then it took a step back as a result of the pandemic. Obviously, what's going to stand out here is the tax base from apartments. That tax base has increased over 250% over the past decade. And that has a real impact on the city's budgeting process. So this is the property tax levy for the city of Minneapolis. Those are the blue bars, again, over the past decade. And you can see it's increased fairly quickly over the past decade. And that's allowed the city of Minneapolis to maintain services in the face of inflation, but it's also, based on my conversations with staff, it's allowed them to invest in new initiatives related to affordable housing and climate that they might not otherwise have been able to invest in. At the same time that their property tax levy, so the revenue that they're collecting from property taxes has been going up, they've actually been able to reduce their property tax rate by 12 percentage points over that same time period, which is not a storyline that they get a lot of credit for. So in addition to the broader economic development benefits of TOD and the benefits to our climate goals, our health goals, safety and equity, it can also help contribute to the financial sustainability of communities where it's happening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to follow that by talking about a very different region, Connecticut. I'm going to share some observations about the role that transit plays in economic development in Connecticut based on work that my colleagues and I at AECOM have been lucky enough to do over the past couple of years with Connecticut DOT, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, and the Capital Region Council of Governments. To orient you to the other coast, this map shows the 3 major cities in Connecticut: Stamford, Hartford, and New Haven, with New York City to the south and Boston and Providence to the northeast. So we're talking northeast corridor here. The blue lines are the passenger rail system, as we'll talk about in a minute. So going back to the late 19th century, Connecticut had a really extensive passenger and freight rail system. And beginning in, say, the 1960s and 70s, the system has seen some significant disinvestment between reduction in service to the interior of the state, on some lines de-electrification, in other places going down to one track. But nonetheless, it has fairly robust transit, historic infrastructure. So on this map, you can see in blue the New Haven line operated by Connecticut DOT with Metro North Railroad. You can see red, which is the more interstate service. Green is Amtrak, and yellow is freight. And the New Haven line in particular, really a core part of the Northeast Corridor, had some of the strongest ridership in the country pre-pandemic, with 40 million annual riders, or about 125,000 trips a day. The major constraint really was that you couldn't add any more trains. So if you were talking about improving services, particularly to the interior of the state, that would come with major trade-offs because we were just at capacity. During the pandemic, obviously a major decrease, which started to recover again, driven at first by weekend rides into New York City, which is something I've heard actually a theme at this conference so far, that there's that strong demand for weekend and evenings. And now back to about 40% of pre-pandemic ridership, with a strong peak in the middle of the week. That service is really uneven. So on the left, I'm showing typical peak hour travel times to New York. You can get from Stamford to New York in under an hour at the right time of day, from New Haven to New York in a couple hours. From Danbury, New Canaan, and Waterbury, the branch lines, it can be much longer, and there are only a handful of trains at peak periods. The map on the right is showing trips to New Haven, which can take, frankly, much longer. From some of the branch lines, there's really just no way to get there. But we know that people really value that access, particularly into New York City. One of our favorite metrics is looking at parking prices, and we found a really strong appetite to skip free parking, even if it's closer, and drive farther to pay for parking in order to get an express train into the city. So it's a really great indicator of the value that transit creates in the state. Beyond parking, another indicator of that value that we've been talking about today is property values. So an interesting study a couple years ago came out from the University of Connecticut, where they looked at stations in Stamford and Hartford. And in Stamford, where rail has really been around for continuously, there's a significant property value premium associated with proximity to rail transit. In Hartford, which went through a long period with no rail transit, it was just reintroduced in 2018, there was little or no relationship between property values and rail, but there was a premium associated with proximity to bus. And the takeaways here is that a few things matter: travel time, proximity to New York, but also system maturity. And so that's something interesting to think about, is as the system grows and gets older, will those property value premiums start to appear? And then a third, beyond parking and property values metric of that value, is the emerging TOD. So along the Hartford line, the new line that opened in 2018, they've started to attract residential and commercial development. Similarly, along a new BRT line. And then on the right, I'm showing photos from Norwalk, which is served by both the main line and one of the branch lines. We also see the importance of transit to the economic development in some of the metrics around disinvestment. So in Hartford, which I just mentioned, went through a long dry period from the late 80s until 2018 with no significant regional rail. We looked at job growth over time, and certainly transit is just one part of this story, But when Amtrak track was removed in the late 80s, the rest of the region started to pull out of the recession, and Hartford really lagged. So the Hartford-Springfield region is that orange line along the bottom. The rest of the Northeast Corridor is the whole Northeast Corridor is the green line, and then the blue line is the Northeast Corridor minus Boston, New York, and DC. So you can see the region really leaving Hartford behind. And again, while transit is not the only part of the story here, we do see a really strong correlation between economic growth and development and access to convenient high-frequency transit in the state. So my colleagues and I have been partnering with the state and with some of the councils of governments to help make the case for new investments in transit in this context. The major vision, the state's major vision, is called Time for Connecticut, which is an $8 to $10 billion vision for improved service that would reduce travel times between some of the key destinations by 25 minutes, enhance direct one-seat service to New York, and improve intra-state connectivity. And then, in addition to the state's vision, some of the COGs and other stakeholders are really advocating for additional branch line improvements and for new and enhanced connections to places like Springfield and Rhode Island. And we see a number of opportunities for economic development here. First, interestingly, in Connecticut, post-COVID, a decades-long trend of population decline has, in the past couple years, reversed. And that's apparently, as far as we can tell from the data and from anecdotes, driven by work from home and hybrid work opportunities, as people had the opportunity to leave New York or Boston for somewhere which might not be convenient to commute back and forth every day, but maybe 2 or 3 days a week it is. So in that context, to the extent that there is appetite for new investment in transit, it creates opportunity to reinforce those connections with major employment centers. The historic building stock and the historic urban cores in parts that are served by rail have a lot of opportunity for reinvestment and creating that kind of work-life play atmosphere that people love. And all of this is underlaid, of course, by that location, proximity to New York and to Boston. But of course, there are some challenges too. The major one, first and foremost, being the costs of some of the reinvestment plan and the uncertain funding for transit improvements, particularly in the wake of those ridership declines that we spoke about at the beginning. And then low-density zoning and community opposition to growth is a big problem in many parts of the state. So this map shows nodes in the gold color with a minimum density of 15 people and jobs per acre, which research shows to be the sort of very minimum density where you can cost-effectively support high-frequency transit. So you can see Connecticut has a number of those nodes. They are located along the state's existing rail lines. But in between, there are a lot of stations with very limited populations supported by single-family homes where there's not a lot of appetite for growth. Long-term disinvestment, the effect, in pockets of boarded-up buildings where there just hasn't been a lot of investment over time. Those properties can be expensive to repurpose. And then, I think most importantly, maintaining affordability. So to the extent that we start to see new demand for places near transit, those are also some of the places that historically have been most affordable in Connecticut, which of course is a very wealthy state. And so making sure that there are policies in place to protect affordability along with economic growth. So to wrap up, some of the strategies that we've been talking to our partners in the state about include targeted investments. So thinking about, given the size of that capital project, are there places where investment will increase service statewide, or places where there's a short-term potential for economic development? The idea of incremental density in places where there's less comfort with higher density growth to try to sort of gradually catalyze the market. Really focusing on affordable housing as part of the complete package with economic development and transit, thinking more holistically about producing affordable housing, protecting existing affordable housing, and also protecting residents who and where they live. And then finally, value capture. And I mean this not only in the sense of implementing value capture mechanisms, property-based financing mechanisms to help to help raise revenue, because while that's a great thing and important, in the end it won't cover an $8 to $10 billion package. It will show that locals have skin in the game, that they have a local match. But I think even more importantly in the sense of what we're doing here today, which is to make the case for transit to legislators and decision makers and really demonstrate the overall economic development benefit of making these investments. So with that, I'd love to take questions. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, perfect. All right. So did we make the case for transit from an economic development lens? I think we did. I think we did. So we're going to open it up for questions. So there's a mic right here if you want to stand there. And if not, I think I can just start out. So I'm going to start with Alison. So what was the turning point for the state to look at reinvesting in Hartford, if I'm correct on it? Yeah, Hartford.
That's a good question. I was not around for that, so I'm going to speak a little out of turn. But I do think that the economic development case was a big part of the messaging and has been throughout the entire investment package that we're talking about. Making the case for the jobs, given the sort of long-term, slow to declining population, really has helped bring people around to the idea, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for that economic development case.
And so when you're sitting there seeing the regional competitiveness happening all around you, I'm sure Hartford was like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And I think, that chart that I showed with the differential was really impactful. It got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to overplay transit as being the one and only thing, but I think it's really important for folks to have access.
Okay. So can I keep going? Should I keep going? If there's a question?
Thank you. That was great. And I want to ask all of you a little bit about your thoughts about value capture mechanisms, because the pitch, and you asked the question at the end, have we made the case? But who do we make the case to? And it sounds like the case is being made to government. Like, look, invest in transit, and it pays you back in jobs and property tax. But all that reflects an enormous increase in private value. So how do we capture the private value that we are creating with these public investments? How can we do that on the front end so that when that happens, we're actually collecting from the private value that we're creating, not just the tax revenue? Because the tax revenue rarely goes back into transit. It goes to lots of other purposes.
Well, I can start. I think your question goes beyond the mechanisms and the tools that we can use, and is more about making the case to property owners for why they should care. And I think one of the interesting things is that we've seen a lot of cases of value capture being successfully used to pay for local improvements. So it's very common to use tax increment financing or special assessment districts or special taxes to pay for local infrastructure that will serve the development. And what's really challenging is to get people to look beyond that and to think about investing in more regional improvements. One of the only good examples of that, I think, is Chicago with the red and purple line investment program, where they're using tax increment financing. In my mind, I think part of the problem really gets back to governance, because I think the role of government is to provide a public good, which is transit is a public good. And so while I think it's important to capture some of that value. I also think realistically, the scale of investment that's required does require governmental action and large-scale regional action in order to pay for it.
I will just add from MARTA's standpoint, right now our focus has been solely on property that we control and own, and it's surface parking lots, right? And so we are master planning 52 acres at our Indian Creek station. We know that we're gonna need infrastructure in there to support that type of investment coming along. And so we're trying now, and I've gotten some great data source opportunities from Michael here. We're needing to make the case not only to our local jurisdictional partners, but the state really, about what we're creating in terms of job opportunities, property tax revenue that'll be generated, because MARTA right now we don't pay taxes, but when the TOD does come online, it's generating revenue that would have never been realized if not for that TOD investment. But we need to be able to paint the picture, and I love the mapping that Michael and his team is doing to really be able to show what's being generated now versus what, was generated or not generated years ago. So I think for us, it's about telling the story to our local jurisdictional partners who right now is not really making investments in our TODs per se. There's probably investments that they're making by increased police services and different things like that these new communities are charging them with delivering on. But I think for us, we have to look at utilities and infrastructure to help bring forth the development in a timely manner. And so I would look at it along those lines. And then when it comes to our new efforts around BRT, I think it's going to be important for us to, because MARTA will not likely go in and acquire the amount of land that we've acquired some 40 years ago and be able to advance TOD. We're going to be looking to the private sector to do that. And so we have to help them see the development opportunity that will exist along these corridors for them and the revenue opportunity that will come forth. And so it's kind of a twofold situation for us right now in terms of what we're needing specifically on our property and what we're trying to sell to the private property owners along these future BRT corridors.
My turn?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for your different perspectives. And I like the way Mr. White opened it up talking about messaging and how a lot of making the case is about messaging and how we communicate what we're trying to do. And I work for a municipality, so we definitely struggle with that sometimes, trying to explain the benefit of transit, because a lot of times transit itself is an economic investment. It is an economic development project. And sometimes, and definitely in Charlotte, our community is afraid of that type of investment because it both has intended consequences, where we're talking about the economic development projects and all the great things that come with it, but also unintended consequences like displacement. And so I wanted to know from you all, as you're making the case or messaging your TOD or TOC, what is the message around anti-displacement or displacement, physical displacement, cultural displacement to the community as an audience? What's the case for that?
We have 3 BRT lines. One is the Truce Max. And so in the last 5 years, when that Max line, I think was $25 million project, we've had from 18th and Truce to about 35th and Truce, over $350 million of private money come in to do housing developments, commercial developments, and all that was done on private land. There was no displacements on that. The benefit of the tools that we have, and when we do projects, like I said, on the east side, there's plenty of incentives, but there's no private capital. The benefit when you own the land and the tools is you can kind of dictate the terms. And so because we're a federal agency, we're not necessarily trying to make a profit per se, meaning that we don't have to move the land to make money because we owe a bank money. We want to get revenue, yes, but for us, it's very important that as any projects come certain areas, that we're very cognizant from what we call the host city to make sure that we work with the neighborhood associations, that they understand that people do live here, and that they have a say-so in what those projects may look like. So like the Promise and the Maybeon are on the east side of Kansas City. The community wants these projects because we've talked to the community. So it's going to be a mixed-use, affordable retail off the Max bus lines. So when we, again, to the point of the messaging is you've got to go out there and tell people, here's why we're here, here's what we're trying to do, and get that buy-in. And because again, developers, they want to build. You know, they want any kind of tools they can get, and our tools de-risk development where we work. Now, we do have a couple of projects like the first North Point was a straight market rate, you know, west of Troost, and quite frankly, it was a test case, and we charged them higher fees and took the difference and put it back on projects on the east side to make them affordable. So it's really being, you know, like I said, very creative on that piece, and then again, I go back to Mike and what he's doing with HUD and the brownfield properties, and there's just different dollars that you can get involved in to try to make sure those costs come down. When you work with some developers as well, because that performer still got to pencil out, right? And so we can use some of that federal money, some of those different other tools. We go to the state, and we've said to both in Missouri and Kansas, our whole case is economic development and growth and taxpayers, and we take charts, similar to Michael's charts, when we go to the politicians. When Michael presents to the board on a project, we list out all the payments to the jurisdictions, the progress payments, the school payment, all those different things, so people see exactly what they're going to get. His presentations talk about the tax increase, tax revenue, all those different things. So we do put that out. I don't want to wonk you guys today, but I mean, we do those things, and I could have spent hours on it, but we really try to make a very clear case about displacement and gentrification, because that is a real issue, and we want to make sure that whoever, I think we got 2 more projects coming down the line, I think with Michael Collins, that are going to be of affordable components to it within the area as well. And so we may have a downtown baseball park soon. And so we're in those discussions with the team about, again, what are you going to build? Where are people going to go? How are you going to move people? So you have to be very intentional when you go into that space about making sure folks don't get kicked out that have been there for years.
So excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And as a follow-up to that, are there strategies that municipalities can do to make sure that the gentrification does not occur and people are run out of their houses because of the increase in property values that leads to increase in property taxation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's something that comes up along our lines a lot, specifically within the context of displacement. One of the light rail lines that we're working on right now is the Metro Blue Line extension, which is going to run from downtown Minneapolis up to Brooklyn Park. And one of the initiatives that the work is actually being led by Hennepin County that we're doing along that corridor is we hired the University of Minnesota to look at the risk of displacement, which is, related to that broader gentrification question. And what can we do to ensure that this transit investment that we're making is going to benefit those communities at the same time that we're adding affordable housing, and we're not driving up the cost for folks to live near this transit service, so it's benefiting those existing communities. So there's still a lot of work that's going into that. We got the initial study completed, and it came up with a list of policies that could be implemented at every phase or every level of government. So it's looking at city, state, county, regional policies that can be implemented to ensure that that displacement doesn't occur. At the same time that we're still allowing new investment in housing, because I think one of the broader things that we've been seeing, inflation in the Twin Cities has actually been doing really well compared to the country as a whole. And one of the reasons that we've been seeing lower inflation as a whole is because we've built so much housing relative to the growth that we've seen, which is a really important part of it. So we've been able to lower that broader increase in housing costs. But that doesn't mean that individual communities near transit aren't going to be impacted. So I think that's something that we're digging into right now. What policies can we do to make sure that we're meeting those broader regional goals at the same time that we're not negatively impacting a community served by transit? So it's not a very direct answer, but it's something that we're still digging into and trying to figure out how we can move forward.
One thing the city of Kansas City, Missouri has is a housing trust fund. I think they seeded with $50 million which when developers come through, they can draw from that fund to try to keep costs down. I don't know what city you're from, but I know that's something that we've been using, and it sounds crazy, but it's almost as if $50 million isn't enough, as we see. And I know it sounds insane, but with those 3 projects we're doing, they're using that as part of that to keep the cost down on our LIHTC projects as well.
And I will just add, in Atlanta, MARTA teamed up with Morgan Stanley and the National Equity Fund to develop or create a fund, a $100 million preservation fund for affordable housing. And I think we've probably expended maybe a half of that already. And to Frank's point, it really doesn't seem like enough. But the beauty here is that, for an affordable housing development that may be nearing the end of its long cycle, there is an opportunity to do a refi with Morgan Stanley to try to keep those units affordable. And we've created this fund for development within a mile radius of transit. So it could be a bus stop, it could be heavy rail, it could be a future BRT stop, whatever. So we're trying to do our part there, but it's tough. I mean, you've heard cities in the past, they would look at freezing property taxes for the elderly, but today I'm sure young folks will say, hey, someone needs to freeze my taxes as well. So it's a challenge for us, and it's been a challenge for years, and we're needing to find a solution collectively, and ultimately it's about how do we get more revenue to bring down the cost and things along those lines.
Yes, I very much enjoyed the presentation. I would love to hear from everyone on the panel a scale of optimism from 1 to 5 about these trends continuing in the next decade, with 5 being the most optimistic.
Optimistic about what?
Continued development.
Okay. I'm going to go with a 5. I know it sounds, again, I say it sounds crazy a lot, but speaking from our region, there's been more interest, sincere issues from both business, civic, and federal in what we're doing on the TOD side, because we're solving problems. We had a meeting with our mayor a week ago, and he was trying to backhand kind of criticize what we're doing. My response was, yeah, but we're fixing your problem that you didn't have the sense enough to fix. And I did say that. I have witnesses here. Because no one was doing it till we did it. I mean, it's like you get tired of hearing people complain. And so we have all the answers? No. But at least we're there. We were trying to get resources, revenue, because if we claim if we're a public good, and I do believe we're a public good, and we're here to serve, then how do we serve better? And if we got a way to do it, then we have to have that empathy to understand. We got to try to know what we can. So I say a 5 just because the environment we're in, but also for the people I got on my team. I got great people, and they're smart, and they're smarter than me, and I think we can try a way to figure it out. And again, it's about finding the right partnerships. It's being here and learning from these guys and learning from what they're doing. And hopefully they're taking notes and stealing ideas so we can be better when we go back home and keep the momentum going.
I would say I'm similarly very optimistic about the trends continuing over that 10-year period. I think locally we're definitely seeing a slowdown in development just as a result of interest rates. But there's so many other trends near our transitways that are really going to support continued TOD development in the future. Aside from all the transit that we're building a really high quality network of transit I think is going to provide a lot of good access for folks. But on top of that, cities have been taking the steps of rezoning areas near transit, which is a really important part of allowing good TOD to occur near our stations, and a lot of that's been happening across the board. There are some challenges to that, of course. Minneapolis has been going through a lawsuit to get their rezoning done, but the city of St. Paul recently adopted zoning, and a lot of other cities have done similar work to allow better transit-oriented development near our stations, eliminating parking requirements, allowing much greater density along whole corridors of our transitways by right up front. And then there's similar, I think another area that I tend to focus on from a TOD perspective is just that street design, because it can really support good TOD, or it can get in the way if you're creating a pedestrian hostile space. And a lot of cities have similarly been redesigning their streets. Every time we see a new road construction project come in, they're making it a much more pedestrian and bike friendly space, and we're taking lanes away from traffic and dedicating them, creating dedicated bike or bus lanes. So I think when you look at all of those pieces cumulatively, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic that these trends will continue. I mean, a lot of that development happened in the absence of all that work. Now we're laying the groundwork for it to continue moving forward, so I'm very optimistic about it. I would probably a 5, absent interest rates right now, yeah.
All right, she's going to pin us down. I think I'm going to say a 4. I think that economic development around transit is absolutely imperative from a climate perspective. We need people living where they are not dependent on cars. And from a housing affordability perspective, to the point earlier, we need massive housing development focused along transit corridors. I think that there are certainly barriers. We also, a lot of the conversation is still around the transit fiscal cliff for for many agencies. And in order to support continued growth around transit, we need good quality transit service. And I think that the conversation around density and growth is changing in a lot of places, but not everywhere. And there's still work to be done in terms of making the case for why change is okay.
Okay. I'm going to say a 5, and that's going to be solely based on the work that we're doing. We are master planning for TOD at a number of what we consider in emerging markets, end-of-the-line stations on our South Line, West Line, and we're working closely with our jurisdictional partners, planning departments, getting the zoning right, getting things in place. We really started looking at this really closely and planning for this opportunity during the pandemic, because nothing was really happening. And to Michael's point, interest rates now is not that attractive for developers. But I figure if we set the stage and get things set up and ready, when the time comes, we'll be better positioned. We do have efforts underway where, truth be told, that our communities are really looking to us to lead that charge, and we're kind of exploring, is there an opportunity for MARTA to tip into self-performing ourselves, to just jumpstart some of this activity. And to Frank's point, we're not bound to really generate a crazy return on our investment in that way. If we're bringing forth affordable housing that we know is desperately needed in Metro Atlanta, what way can we do that? We can quickly, realize something on property that we own if we don't have to go out and make that acquisition, if we're able to team up with some of our community development partners, able to tap into funding coming from various sources all around Metro Atlanta at the state and federal level, we may be able to continue on that road to introducing TODs at these stations. The interesting part for me, though, would be to see how things transpire along the BRT corridors, where MARTA will not be going in and acquiring, 25 acres of land. We just don't need a whole lot to set up that BRT stop. So that'll be the interesting part, and we would really be leaning on our local jurisdictional partners and the private sector to bring forth the type of investment that we know that corridor would need to support the transit that we're trying to invest in there.
Hi, so this has been extremely, extremely helpful. I am bringing so much back that's going to be wonderful. I am from Pittsburgh, Rust Belt City, and what I find to be the case is folks have broken heart syndrome, where everything was really going great and then everything crashed, the economy crashed, and then we just didn't invest in infrastructure for 5 decades. So I'm wondering, it seems very difficult to get the community over that threshold of disbelief, basically. And it's like almost a hostility to changing things or making progress, because it seems like folks are really set in like this fear that things will only crumble or get worse. Feels like there's this desperation to like status quo because that's all we can count on. So has anybody dealt with that kind of a sentiment or community and or advice? I would really love. Thanks.
I mean, I know that when we first started 4 years ago, there wasn't support. I mean, we were being fought by some of the community. City Hall fought us. Question was why are you doing this? You should be doing this. Like I said before, well, somebody had to do it. You know, we spent $62 million on Prospect Max. It's our highest route. It's on the east side of Kansas City. I grew up there. Terry grew up there. Mike grew up there. And it's been 7 years of disinvestment. Nothing was there. I was hollowed out. So for us, it became very personal. You know, we're from there. How do we, I don't use the word, we got out, so to speak, and it's like, okay, we made it. Now, how to make sure that we create that hope, that access for those who come behind us. And it was just a fight. It was just a test of wills. You just keep pushing, you keep pressing. We had great attorneys, and it's just going to those community meetings and having those conversations with your elected officials, and you're just grinding it. And eventually, you get that first project, you get that buy-in, and people go, oh, okay, I think this might work. Now we got everybody down to Prospect Quarter calling with great ideas of what they want to see done. Now we're not working fast enough. And even then, even with all that we've done so far, we're still getting the pushbacks from like your EDCs or, again, City Hall, trying to kind of keep us in that bus box. But we keep pressing and keep pushing, getting that federal support, that state support, building that outside-in support to make sure that we get that third-party validation of what we do. But it'll never be easy. But again, it's about building those relationships and partnerships, being consistent in what you do and believing what you do. I mean, there are some days you want to say, man, let's skip this, but you can't quit. Because, when you think you're on the right side of something, it's a lot easier to keep fighting than if you don't believe in what you're doing. And I believe it 100%. It's for our team, because again, this is where we came from. So it's hyper personal. But in transit, we all work in transit in this room, and the beauty of our business is you can see the impact on what you do every day. The people you help every day get where they got to go. So there is a quick visceral return of what you do, and the work that you do matters. And if you carry that ethos with you, it's real about the planning, getting the right support, the right people to state your case, and then go state your case. And I won't say it's easy every day, but if you'll win more than you will lose. And I think right now we're winning, but we may lose tomorrow, but we'll win on Wednesday, right? I mean, you just keep going. So that's what I would say. Just make sure you've got your allies, your alliances, your community groups, whoever that you're working with. Make sure they're always on their A game, because trust me, there's people lurking around to try to catch you off. And like I said, we've been extremely fortunate to have some of the best people around us that bought into what we're trying to get done. And so here we are with projects. And I mean, we were fighting for project last Monday down at City Hall. They were trying to fight us on a project for 51 seniors with no cars, on a bus line, all on Section 8 vouchers. And it was one of those affordable housing projects that had to get refinanced. And we're like, well, we can do it and keep these folks in their house. And they didn't want to give us the LIHTC signature just to do it. And we had to raise holy hell to finally get the mayor to sign off on it. And it was like, dude, this ain't about you. This is about these 51 people that have nowhere to go if we don't do what we're supposed to do. So this is what I say, but because we had like really good attorneys that believed in the mission, and we were successful. But it's that kind of stuff. But again, you will win more than you will lose.
Hi, thanks again for this panel. Awesome group of JD power players. This is a bit of a tangent to the general conversation, but I'm super curious, and it's a two-parter. Given what TfL in London is doing, TransLink is doing, in BC creating real estate arms for their transit agencies, how are you making the business case for transit agencies to be more involved in these investments, right? I don't know if we're going to get there anytime soon, but it's just interesting to see now it's coming to North America. How are you making the business case to your board members? And then I guess the second question is, who do you think is going to be the first one in the U.S. to do this? You can't choose your own agency.
Use your own agency?
No, you can't choose your own.
We did it though.
Do you have a development arm?
Yeah, we did.
Wow.
It was Riot KC11 Corporation. Our board actually had it created 4 years ago.
Wow.
And then I just brought it back in-house for more resource and support, but we have a separate arm for real estate.
You can borrow against that.
Yeah.
Everything. Totally.
Yeah.
And does your board control it?
They do now.
They do now.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Very impressive.
So we,
Sorry, I came in late to your presentation, so if that's what you said at the beginning.
Remember we talked about this at Build America up in D.C. because we were talking about 10th and Main in your office.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good question. No. But I'm curious. Where else do you think it's going to expand to? Right. I mean.
Yeah.
If
Well,
you started it, right?
I must be wrong. I stole the idea from MARTA. I didn't tell you that. I was stalking your website. That's the first time I saw it was really on your website.
Yeah.
You know, the Department of Real Estate. I was like, well, that's kind of cool, because we were told to go build one, and that was it. There was no plan. So I'm like, well, let me get online, and yours was the first one I went to, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. I was too scared to call you.
But you should have.
But
You should have.
you look really mean in your picture, so I was scared to call you. And so just, looked at those guys, looked at LA Metro, looked at DART, and just started looking at piecing things together, and then talked to some local people in KC that had done it with our Port Authority, had done something somewhat similar, Port KC, and just really starting to build that together. We had a totally separate 501c3, separate board, separate policy, separate everything. The bonding policies belonged to the ATA, but we were like the arm that went out and found those things. And so ideally was to scale it up from doing, we own some land, but then having developers come, but ideally is to acquire more properties and really to create a revolving fund of our own, to really start going and funding our own programs, different things. That's the long-term play. I don't know if you knew that or not, Michael, but that is the long-term play to, but that was really the idea, is to start doing that scale of project, really because it's just about, we talk about the fiscal cliff, we have to find our own way. Federal we're good, but locally we can't just assume people are going to just give us money. But our thing is, because we've got such a demand, I said this morning, we've got a World Cup coming in 2026. Now people are like coming to us like, what do you need? What do you need to make sure that we have the proper experience for folks when they come, but also to maintain our current level of service, but also that 6-week window. So I am, like I said, when I took over as a CEO 14 months ago, my first thought was, how can I basically scale TOC as high as I could with resources, support, and those different things. So we're kind of low-key doing it.
Yeah, I will add to Frank in that we're not quite you yet. We're thinking through how we could actually become or create the opportunity to do a little bit more in real estate development. So everything is still in-house underneath MARTA, but there's a lot of pressures around Metro Atlanta for us to begin exploring that, and that would definitely be a game changer.
Yeah,
so,
but we took it out because we couldn't get the work done in-house. There was just inner politics, but the idea was always for it to be under the ATA umbrella.
okay.
It's a division of art. Mike and Brian, they pretty much have the autonomy to go do whatever. It's just now they got access to more resources through planning, through marketing, through facilities that we didn't have when Brian and I were doing it. We were paying separate contracts for those things because they just thought we were weird. And so this allows us to really scale up and do some things. So, if you want to talk to Mike about some TIFIA money, he's right over there. Where's that light? Put on Mike right there.
Hi, good afternoon. I want to go back to that question that somebody posed earlier about the ranking from 1 to 5 about how optimistic you are. So I've heard you make the case for transit-oriented development. So going back to that scale of 1 to 5, how optimistic are you about achieving transit-oriented, equitable development?
I'm still going to stick with 5.
Yeah.
I mean, our actual policy is called the ETOD policy, so it's designed with equity at the front. That's just something, from my own personal values, is very important to me. Equity or access, what you call it. So everything that we've done has always been through the equity lens, because again, we're a public entity. So we have a higher standard I feel we have to operate on, and so we serve the public. So equity has to be a piece of that. Otherwise, we shouldn't be doing it.
I would stick with a 5 as well. And I know that, just going through these master plans, that's been at the forefront, making sure that what we're creating are equitable communities at the end of the day.
So I was a 4 or 5 with the first one. I think I'm a little bit less optimistic on that front. And I think the main piece for that is, well, the reason I'm optimistic for that is that most of the cities where we're making these transit investments are prioritizing new affordable housing and the preservation of affordable housing. But I think the broader challenge is just getting enough funding to build the scale of affordable housing that we really need near our transit ways. We really need a lot of affordable housing, and we're still well short of that. And I think that's the reason I'm a little bit less optimistic, is that we just need a lot more resource going into that. I guess another reason I tend to lean towards the optimistic side, but the state of Minnesota did authorize a metro-wide sales tax, a $0.25 for affordable housing this last session, and that's going to go through the counties to help support new affordable housing. But I think in general, there's just such a significant need that I don't see where all of those resources are going to come from yet.
I don't think that you can solve the problem of equity around transit without solving our larger national affordable housing crisis. And so I think places like Minneapolis actually give me hope. It's one of the few cities in the country where housing prices have maintained some level of stability, and that's because they've built a crap ton of housing. So I guess it's the same answer, which is that we just have to, get over the concerns that folks have about change in their neighborhoods, and we have to allow a lot of housing to be built. So I lean optimistic because the alternative wouldn't be great.
Still time. Okay, thank you. Great discussion today. Art Gazzetti from APTA. My question, Michael, you in particular perhaps talked about the ratables coming in. I found that to be compelling. But I also remember Jessica Mefford-Miller, when she spoke this morning, said much of their development, perhaps a great percentage, was from institutions locating along the line, universities, whatnot. So I'm wondering if there's a metric that actually could amplify, it's not just the ratables, it's the institutions, it's the public facilities, the public purpose that is attracted as well. Just an overall comment.
Yeah, and that is actually something that we track as well. I mean, it doesn't show up in the property tax data that I was showing, obviously, but that is something that's really important to us because we want to make sure that folks have access to those services along transit. So that's an important piece. So one of the things that we track in the development trends along transit is all of that public and institutional investment. Since it still shows up in our permit data, it does show up in the development trends along transit report that we include on our website. So you can see how much of that new institutional development is happening within walking distance of transit. So that's an important piece too, and we do track it, and I agree that we need it. It's an important part of providing that broader transit-oriented community that we keep talking about.
Okay. All right. Any more questions for us? No? Okay, guys, so we still have 5 minutes. Are there any closing remarks that you guys want to make?
My views, I'm a huge advocate for public transit. and I'm relentless in my advocacy for it and make no apologies. So what we do really matters. I think sometimes we underestimate the impact that we have as an industry and what we do and how important we are. And I think we should have like an enormous amount of swag about what we do, because we do matter. And if you don't remember anything I said, just don't forget that we do make a difference. And then what we do is it helps the people. You may not know them, but they depend on you and what we do. So just don't forget that.
Okay, I think we made the case. We're going to go back to our prospective cities and continue to make the case for investments around transit, guys. I'm really excited about it. I just want to thank Alison, Michael, and Frank for being a part of this panel and just sharing some unbelievable wisdom, for sure. I'll be calling you Frank, and Michael and Alison. But it's at the end of the day for all of us guys, it's just really about how do we capitalize on what we're sitting in the middle of around transit and really be able to effectively tell the story to help bring in the resources that we need to continue doing the work that we all just so love doing. All right, and with that, thank you guys.